Okay, well, now we're going to spend a few minutes in the Word as we always do. If you've been with us for a while, you know that through the spring we were doing a series of sermons through the book of Exodus, and we finished that a couple weeks ago. And now what we're doing is for a few weeks, kind of in this summer in-between time, for a few weeks we're looking at ways in which the New Testament carries on the story of Exodus. And what do we do with some of those things? You know, what was permanent in the book of Exodus? What was temporary in the book of Exodus? We're not in the same point in the story now as they were then. And so what's the same? What's different? And so the last two Sundays, we were looking at the Gospel of John to see how the Gospel of John sort of advances the story of Exodus. Today and next week, we're going to be looking at a couple passages from the book of Hebrews. And then for the rest of the summer, there's kind of some odds and ends of things that we're, the sermons won't be quite so hyper-organized. But just so you can begin thinking about the autumn, probably in September, we're going to begin a series of sermons on the book of Revelation. Okay, for pretty much all my life, I've avoided preaching through the book of Revelation because sometimes there can be an unhealthy interest in the book of Revelation, or looking at it in what I think at least are weird ways, or not, I shouldn't say weird, not helpful ways, and not necessarily the ways in which the writer had in mind. And so I've just finally, in talking with some others in the autumn, we're going to, have some sermons through Revelation. So that, that might excite some of you. So anyway, I hope you'll enjoy that. I hope it'll be profitable. But anyway, that's where we're going. But for today and next Sunday in the book of Hebrews. And if you read the book of Hebrews, one of the themes is the idea of pressing on or moving on to maturity or to completion. And there's even some images toward the end of the book of Hebrews about, you're in a race and you need to keep running, following the example of the people who've come before you, but you've got to keep running. And so, one way that you could talk about the book of Hebrews is just keep going, okay? And in a sense, that's one of the things the writer is telling them, and I'll talk about why in a moment, that they need to just keep going. You got to keep going, and of course, many of us have experienced that in the last few months with all the weirdness of being in isolation or whatever, dealing with that. You just kind of have to keep going. And you have to keep going and persevere through it. And, Latvia, people made some wise choices, and we just kept going with distance and wearing masks and all of that. And look, we kept going, and we're in better shape than most of the world. I'm pretty proud of Latvia and Latvians and people in Latvia that we just kept going, not being too stupid, and we're in a better situation. The same place where I found that particular image, I found this. I'm generally not into kind of, motivational lines or motivational memes. They don't generally do a lot for me personally. But this is interesting as we think about some of what I want to talk about today. 99% of the battle is getting your mind right. I'm not sure if that's exactly true. I doubt, that's a scientific fact or whatever. But it does express the truth that what happens in our mind, makes a big difference. How we view ourselves and the circumstances and so forth, it does make a big difference. And it's generally wiser to live by truth, to understand reality, than to, live by foolishness. And once again, I think we've seen multiple examples in the last few months of people who have chosen to live by truth and facts, and others who've chosen to operate on the basis of ideology, which hasn't worked out so well. So getting our mind right is very, very important. And part of my job, as I see my job as a pastor and a teacher, is to help us to see reality better, I hope, and to think better. I mean, I've said before that I'm not kind of the type of preacher where I give 5 things to do here and 5 ways to do this and 10 ways to do this. I'm not into a lot of practical, that kind of step-by-step practical advice on Sunday morning. That has a place, in our life, and there's people in this community who are very good about giving very specific suggestions about maybe do this and do this and do that. But on Sunday morning, that tends to not be what I do. I'm trying to get us to think along with what the Bible is saying, even when some things are tough to understand. I mean, the book of Revelation is not going to be necessarily an easy book to understand, but hopefully we can learn to think along with that book better. But it is important to learn how to think well about our life and where we are, and how we need to live and on what basis we're supposed to live. And one of the reasons is found in this kind of what I titled this sermon. If you saw, on the Facebook page, this was how I announced the topic. And I asked this question, what are you running for? And one of the reasons I use that sentence is because it can actually be taken in a number of different ways. What are you running for? Why are you running? Just walk, just go easy, take it easy. Why are you running? It's like excited kids and they're running everywhere. And, when you're a little bit older parent, it's like, what are you running for? Would you please just slow down? Or what are you running for at all in your entire life? Why are you just constantly busy, running, going? Or what are you running for? What is it that you're headed to? Why are you going anywhere and where are you going? What is it all about? What are you running for? And so that can imply a lot of different things. What are you running for? One of the reasons we need to learn to think and to pay attention to the Bible and to think carefully and to avoid certain kinds of extremes is because in the Bible there's some paradoxes or there's some tensions. And that it's often easy. I mean, I used to use an image of walking across a bridge, and there's two different sides you can fall off. And generally, it's good to try to stay in the middle of the bridge because sometimes, you realize this side of the bridge is a danger, and you want to miss that. And sometimes there's a tendency to go to the other side, and we're on a danger going to the opposite side. And so it's not easy, but it's important to learn to live in this kind of tension in the midst of paradoxes with some gray areas. And in the book of Hebrews, one of these paradoxes is this idea of running. Because there is this image of running. You're in a race, and it's a long race, and you need to run with endurance the race that is set before you. And it's a lifetime kind of thing. But also in the book of Hebrews, it talks about rest. There's a rest. Okay? And how in the world do they fit together? Are we supposed to run or rest? Because they seem to be opposites. In what sense are we supposed to run? In what sense are we supposed to rest? And what does rest mean? And you see this in other places. I mean, Jesus talked about, for instance, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Okay, so there is some kind of yoke, there is some kind of burden, but it's also light. Are we supposed to work or not? Paul talked about it's by faith and not by works. But then also Paul talks about doing good work. So what's the answer? Are works good or bad? Are we supposed to work or not work? It's kind of both. And it's figuring out what kind of works are we supposed to do and what are the kind of works that are not helpful. So how are we supposed to run, but what kind of rest is supposed to be available to us if we are also running. So in Hebrews chapter 3, the writer says, take care, brothers and sisters. And in a few verses later, we won't read it, he talks about fear. There's something that you need to fear, but at the same time, he talks about not being afraid. So once again, okay, are we supposed to be afraid or not afraid? Okay, that's the kind of tension or the paradox. And once again, we got to figure out what is it that we ought to fear and what is it that we don't have to fear. Because there are certainly some things we ought not to fear, and we shouldn't live in fear. If we live in fear of certain things, we're not going to just keep going. We've got to get rid of those kind of fears, but there are certain kind of fears that we need to kind of hold on to, and what are they? By the way, this is going to be kind of a two-part sermon, so hopefully there will be something worthwhile for you today, but I hope either you'll come back next week or, of course, it'll be live streamed, then eventually the recording gets put on our YouTube page, and so I hope you can listen to next week's sermon as well, even if you're not here, because it'll all make better sense, these two sermons together, but hopefully this week still will will be useful. Well, take care, brothers and sisters, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But encourage one another day after day. It might be that some of the early house churches maybe literally met daily. If not, maybe they were still in contact. One of the interesting things about that COVID time is even though we couldn't meet face to face, we actually, not everyone joined it, but for about a month, we had a daily Zoom prayer time. So we actually, as a church, met more often, while we were in isolation than we were now. So there was kind of a meeting day to day. It was actually a good thing. We're saying wineskins, of course, is a different context, but the last few months forced us into some slightly different wineskins in the church, and I think it's been a good thing, to think differently so that we can actually be in more contact with one another and encourage one another day after day. But the writer says, as long as it's still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers with Christ if we hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. So the writer is thinking about a story, the story of these people's lives. And we've talked often about a story and thinking about where we are in the story, where the story is, where God's story is, and where are we in the story. And so the writer talks about there's a beginning and an end, the beginning of their walk with Jesus, whoever told them first about Jesus, and their life of faith began there. And there will be an end to that, but they're not at that end. Okay, right now they're at this time of today. And today is the critical time. Okay? Beginning well is not enough. Okay, you've got to begin to finish, and you want to begin well, sure, but to begin well is not enough. Okay, you have to just keep going. And so the writer says, today there's an opportunity, there's something going on today, and you need to think critically about this day, this today period. You've not reached the end, okay? But right now you have today, and you've got to think carefully and make careful choices and walk by faith today. So why is the writer doing this? What is the book of Hebrews even all about? And part of what's going on in Hebrews is the people are not really, that he's writing to, are not necessarily taking seriously their place in the story, where the story is and where they fit into the story. So the book of Hebrews is written probably to a house church made up of Jewish Christians, probably in Rome. In Rome, there's a number of churches, a number of house churches. They probably never got together in a big group. So a lot of different house churches scattered around Rome. Some were probably mainly Gentile. Some were mixed. Some were probably mainly Jewish. And this seems to be a largely Jewish house church. And they're living in Rome or wherever they are at a time when it's becoming increasingly difficult to be a follower of Jesus. Because the pressure is on. There's more and more Christians, and they are appearing to be a threat to the powers that be, because they don't quite fit in with the rest of society. For instance, they don't want to say that Caesar is Lord. In Rome, when everyone is saying Caesar is Lord, and there's these group of people who will not say Caesar is Lord, people are going to see that. So it's becoming difficult to be a Christian for them. And what these Jewish believers are thinking is that before they became followers of Jesus and were just Jewish, just purely Jewish, everything was okay. In the Roman Empire, the Jewish religion was an accepted religion. Okay, they were allowed to practice their religion in their own way, and Jewish people were not persecuted for being Jewish, for worshiping Yahweh or going to Jerusalem or whatever. Okay, it was a legally recognized religion. And when the church was first born, the Romans kind of thought, oh, that's just another group of those Jewish people. But now when Hebrews is written, the Romans are beginning to understand, oh, these Christians, They're not quite the same. This is a different kind of thing. Okay, now we've accepted the Jewish religion, but these Christians, they're a different group of people. And we don't have to respect them or care about them. And if they mess up our system, we can change them. So that's what's going on. And so these Jewish Christians are kind of thinking, it was kind of easier before. You know, when we did not talk about Jesus and we didn't name the name of Jesus and we didn't meet in church, it was easier before. Maybe if we go back to that part of our story, we will be okay. Because after all, you know, it was a God-revealed religion. You know, I mean, that was kind of God's way at that time. So they might be thinking, this might be okay for us. Because it really was God who gave us this system. And if we just kind of go back to that, we won't be persecuted. That's good news. And maybe it will all be okay in the end. Maybe we can still make it to where we want to be by the old system and not by Jesus. And that's why the writer is saying, you can't. You can't make it any other way. It's only Jesus. You will only get to the end through Jesus. He's the only one who can bring anyone to the end. He's the only one. He's the only one who can bring anyone to the end. No other system, no other God, nothing else can bring us to the end except Jesus. And so what the book of Hebrews is doing is he's writing to these people and he's going to talk about the superiority of Jesus, how he's better than everything, and especially for these Jewish Christians who are struggling with being Christians, who might think maybe this old system was okay. The writer is trying to show them that no, that old system was good, but in comparison to Jesus, it wasn't enough. Jesus is superior to everything. And every argument in the book of Hebrews is about the superiority of Jesus, and that's why if you turn your back on Jesus, you have no hope, and you will not get to where you want to be. So that's kind of in a nutshell what's happening in the book of Hebrews, and he starts it with the very first words in Hebrews 1:1. He says, God, after he spoke to the fathers and the prophets in many portions, in many ways, so the writer says, yes, that Old Testament revelation was revelation from God, but he says it was in all these different ways and in different portions. It wasn't quite complete. But he says, in these last days, God has spoken in his Son. Remember, the way that John put it is he's the Word. He's the Word who became flesh. In the beginning was the Word. And now the writer of Hebrews says, now in these days God has spoken more clearly and more completely through his Son, through whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the world. Again, if you remember 2 weeks ago, John chapter 1, it's the same thing John said about Jesus. It's through Jesus that God created the universe. And he is the radiance of his glory. It's another word from the Gospel of John. Okay, glory. Jesus is full of glory. He is the glory of God the Father. And he's the exact representation of his nature. And he upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification for sins, the way John put it, he's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. The writer of Hebrews just simply says, when he made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. And next week we're going to come back to that. Jesus, when he completed this task of being crucified for sins, he was accepted at the right hand of the Father, and he's sitting there. In fact, in a few minutes we'll talk about what it means, the fact that he's sitting there where he is. It's very, very meaningful. That's just a powerful sentence, one of the most powerful sentences in the New Testament, I think. And he's become as much better than the angels as he has inherited a more excellent name than they. And so the writer talks about how Jesus is better than angels, and then he's going to talk about how he's greater than Moses and how he's greater than Aaron and all the Old Testament priests, and Jesus is superior to all of that. So we have to fix our eyes on Jesus. So that's what's going on in Hebrews, and why there's this critical day of today, when today we need to fix our eyes on Jesus and maintain faith. And then at the beginning of chapter 3, the writer says, "Therefore, holy sisters and brothers, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider Jesus." And this is a phrase he used a number of times. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Consider Jesus. Think about Jesus. Keep Jesus in front of you. Jesus explains everything. He's the answer. He's the answer to all questions. So consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was in all his house. But he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses. He's superior. Moses is good, but Jesus is superior. And here's why. By just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone. Ultimately, the builder of all things is God. Now, Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant. And that's good. Moses was faithful. But that was a testimony or a pointer about the things that would be spoken of later. So what happens in the book of Exodus? What Moses said, it was good and true and important, but it was a pointer. Moses wasn't saying, look at me, look at this. It was, this is really a pointer to something else. The whole tabernacle wasn't the main thing in itself. It was a pointer of something else. It was a lesson about someone else was going to fulfill all of that imagery. Christ was faithful as a son over his house. Again, you get the point. Moses good, Jesus better. Exodus good, Jesus better. Tabernacle good, but Jesus better. Of course, the good news for us, and this is the point about where we are in the story, is Jesus has come. We're already in the story when the solution has come. I mean, this is the amazing blessing that we live in these days. And, you think about the days that we're living in, things happening in America and all around the world, disease and all of that. And you think, what a crappy day to be living in. Except Jesus has come. This is a better day. This is a better day than the days of Exodus and Moses. Because Jesus has come. He's actually come. Everything was pointing to He's come. So Christ was faithful as the son over his house. Not just the servant, but the son. And we are that house if we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope firm into the end. And next week we're going to talk more about that confidence. Fear, but confidence. What we ought to fear, but what we ought to be confident in. And if we have the right kind of confidence, the kind of fear we don't need to have, and so that we can actually live boldly. But a key word here is the word faithful. He was faithful. Jesus was faithful to him who appointed him. And Moses was also faithful. Again, Christ was faithful. It's in italics because in Greek that word faithful isn't really there, but it's continuing the thought. But the point is, the writer is, besides just reminding these Christians, struggling Christians, that Jesus is better, he's saying what both Moses and Jesus had in common is they were faithful. And so you too, you guys, you struggling little house church in Rome who are afraid, be faithful. Be faithful. Hold on to your faith. Be faithful. Consider Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Hold on to Jesus. Be faithful just like Moses was and just like Jesus was. And so being faithful to the end is what the writer is encouraging these Christians to do, to hold on to faith all the way to the end, because they're not there yet. And every day is today. Today is today, and you're going to wake up tomorrow, and that's going to be your today. And you're going to have another today and another today. And every one of those todays We have to make a choice. Are we going to consider Jesus and keep our eyes on Jesus and hold on to Jesus as the only one who's going to get us where we really want to go? Or are we going to look for something else for our satisfaction? Or are we going to think someone else or something else can bring us where we want to be? I mean, I'm just, Tom's pointed out, for we Americans, 4th of July, the birth of our nation, there's lots of things I like about America, but America's not going to take any of us home. America's not going to solve anyone's problems. It's not the solution to America. America can't get its own act figured out. Don't put your faith in your nation. Don't put your faith in your culture. It's not going to take you where you want to be. Only Jesus can take you to the end. There's a good things. I mean, I'm grateful for what I received, I had a good education in America and health and good parents, and all of that is good, and I'm grateful for it, but it's not taking me home. Okay, it can't, and no nation can. Okay, it's not going to bring me to the end where I want to be. Only Jesus can do that. So be faithful to the end. So we have this, again, there's a beginning, and they have begun well. Okay? But they're thinking about going back in their story. Maybe they can go to an early part of their story, an early part of the God story. And maybe it'll be okay, but no, they have to go on because God's story has moved on. And if they don't join God's story, they're just going to miss it. Okay, so again, today something is being offered to them. And in Hebrews 3 and 4, the word that is used is rest. And so the writer says, so there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So just for a few minutes, and I'm getting close to being done in case you were worried, I want to talk about this rest. And I can't, I won't try to say everything about it or all of what it's going to look like or why rest is the right kind of word. Next week we'll kind of complete that picture. But part of what I want us to get today is a view, kind of a brief glimpse, more complete glimpse next week, but a glimpse of what a kind of life that God has in mind for us. For instance, rest here, the Sabbath rest, that's not heaven. If he was just talking about heaven, he could talk about heaven. He's not talking about heaven. For one thing, it's about today. There's a rest available today, not just when you die. Of course, when we die, that rest will be even more complete, in the new heavens and the new earth. But that's not what the writer is talking about rest. He's talking about a way we can see our lives, we can think rightly about our lives and live a better kind of life because God has in mind for us an amazingly beautiful life, not necessarily easy life, but a life of fulfillment, not a passive life. That's not actually what rest means. Why do I say that? Well, in the book of Hebrews, talked about Jesus, and several times the writer makes that point that Jesus sat down at the right hand of the Father. And again, next week I'm going to talk more about the importance of the sitting, what that points to, and that it's the right hand of the Father. But you might think, Jesus sitting, and you have a big lazy boy chair, and you put your feet up, and you're sitting back with something to drink, and you're in your pajamas or, robe. Jesus, I guess, wore a robe all the time. But that's not the picture. Jesus sitting, it's not that, now I'm just done and I'm just chilling. I don't have to do anything more. In the book of Hebrews, Jesus is still active. He's still doing things. Even though we have this image of seated in a chair, he's still doing something. He has completed something. He has rested from a part of his work, but he's still active. So rest is not the idea of just complete nothing, stillness. The same way with God, because here in Hebrews 3 and 4, The writer talks about the creation story. And God created, and then God entered into his Sabbath. God rested from all his works. Well, that all doesn't really mean all. God didn't stop doing anything on the seventh day of creation. He's still active. Okay, he's resting in one sense, but he's actually still active. I mean, it's a good thing, otherwise we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be here anymore if God decided I'm just going to, ascend into outside of the cosmos and leave everything to itself. God is active. He's always active. He's always engaged. But he rested. What does that mean? The creation story isn't just, this is how the earth started. The creation story is told in a particular way. Okay, and when God is kind of recreating the earth was without form and void, and then step by step, God is not just making the cosmos, he's making a particular kind of space. And there's images of the temple in the creation story. And so the idea of it, in God making this earth, it's like he's making a house or a temple. And he's creating a space where he and humanity can meet together. It's a temple. And so when God creates the earth, the universe, and then the earth, and there's all these things are good and put into order, God rests from that, just like if someone builds a house. And a few of you, maybe been in that process of building a house, or maybe you've done major remodeling in your flat. And if you've done that here in Latvia, some of you know that can kill a person trying to build a house in Latvia or do major repair work. I mean, in our house, we went through 3 different builders. I mean, probably, Bill, you prefer to do most of your own work rather than to work with some kind of workers. I mean, it's just, I didn't know if I was going to survive. I'm just 25 years old, and I'm just gray like this just because of building a house. But you build that house, and it's a battle. In fact, Victor here, I don't know if you remember, Victor, a conversation when we started the house, you said, it's like a boxing match. I mean, that's how he put it. It's just a fight. That whole process of building. Okay? And then when it's done, then you can live in it. And in a sense, rest. Doesn't mean you don't do anything, I mean, you still have to clean it, you still have to cook food, and, the grass has to be cut, and, okay, you're still active, but you're resting. That whole preparatory stage is done, and now I can enjoy what this is all about. So God creates the earth, and now we together, I and these creatures in my image, can enjoy this space together. So to rest is to simply be where God wants you to be, doing what God wants you to do with God. With God, that you are actually with God. It's not a matter of being passive. There's still stuff to do. There's still running. But it's a different view of our running. It's a different view of our doing, because we know we're where we are supposed to be. I mean, last week we recognized a bunch of graduates. I mean, I think we had 11 graduates, in our community. That's amazing. I mean, that's like, that's more than a tenth of our community. And that was hard work, I think, for some of you. I'm guessing it was hard work for most of you, but it was satisfying. You're done now, and you're probably glad you're done, and now you can rest in that, not completely, because, you still have to get a job and make money. You know that, of course. No one pays you for just having a degree. You got to work. Okay, but when you were studying, it was hard, but also you might have had a sense, this is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm glad and I'm grateful, that I can be at this place and go through this step. This is a rest. God has a vision for our life where we're in the right place, and we can be satisfied with that. Not necessarily an easy place. It's often not, but we can say, this is where I'm supposed to be. I know I'm supposed to be here, and it's good because I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I don't maybe always get it right. We'll come back to that. How can we rest when we often get it wrong? We can rest in getting it wrong. Okay, that's next week's sermon, how we can rest when we get it wrong. But we can get it wrong and still say, I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm struggling, and it's hard, and I sometimes fail, but I'm going to just keep going. Because this is where I'm supposed to be. And the really good news is that God is with me. I'm sharing in His presence. He has created this space for us to dwell together. It's a rest. It's work, but it's rest. And that's a life that God has in mind for us. And we experience it only through Jesus, only with Jesus. But it's a beautiful vision that the writer calls rest. So there remains this rest for the people of God. And he points to the Old Testament people who started well, but they didn't experience the rest. Okay, the Exodus generation, all those miracles that we've talked about, God delivered them from Egypt, gave them the tabernacle, and delivered them to take them into the land. And only a small handful of them ever got into the land. God had a rest in mind, but most of them didn't experience it because they didn't just keep going. Let's pray.